Alexander Whitmore was reviewing quarterly financial reports when his secretary's voice crackled through the intercom, interrupting his concentration on the spreadsheets that documented his empire's continued expansion. At 52, Alexander commanded a business conglomerate worth $12 billion, with interests spanning technology, real estate, and pharmaceutical companies across 3 continents. His corner office on the 48th floor of the Whitmore Tower in downtown Manhattan reflected his success. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered commanding views of the city, while priceless artwork and handcrafted furniture spoke to both wealth and refined taste. The interruption was unusual because Alexander's schedule was meticulously planned months in advance, with every minute accounted for and protected by layers of assistance and security personnel. Unexpected visitors simply did not gain access to his private office without extensive background checks and pre-approved appointments. Yet his secretary's voice carried a note of uncertainty that immediately caught his attention. Standing before his massive mahogany desk was an elderly nun who appeared to be in her 70s, wearing a traditional black habit that seemed to belong to another era. Her presence was incongruous in the ultra-modern office environment, like a figure from history who had somehow stepped through time into the present. Despite her advanced age, she carried herself with quiet dignity and purpose, her weathered hands clasped calmly in front of her as she waited for his acknowledgement. Alexander's first reaction was confusion mixed with irritation. He had built his fortune through precision, control, and careful planning. Random intrusions into his carefully orchestrated day were not just unwelcome, they were virtually impossible given his security arrangements. Yet here stood this mysterious woman who had somehow navigated past multiple layers of protection to reach his inner sanctum. What struck him most immediately was the nun's eyes. Despite her aged appearance and humble clothing, her gaze was sharp and knowing, suggesting an intelligence and awareness that commanded respect. She studied him with the quiet confidence of someone who had traveled a great distance for a specific purpose and would not be easily dismissed or deterred from her mission. Alexander's mind raced as he tried to understand how this woman had gained access to his office. His building's security was state-of-the-art, featuring biometric scanners, multiple checkpoints, and a team of former military and intelligence personnel who screened every visitor. The elevator to his floor required special access codes, and his personal security detail was trained to intercept any unauthorized individuals long before they could reach his private workspace. His secretary, Margaret, appeared in the doorway behind the nun, her face flushed with embarrassment and concern. Margaret had worked for Alexander for 8 years and had never allowed such a breach of protocol. Her expression conveyed both confusion about how the situation had occurred and anxiety about how her employer would react to this unprecedented security failure. The nun seemed unconcerned by the commotion her arrival had caused. She stood quietly in the center of the office, apparently comfortable with the tension her presence had created. Her calm demeanor suggested that she had not stumbled into his office by accident, but had deliberately sought him out for reasons that remained unclear. Alexander activated the intercom to his head of security, demanding an immediate explanation for how an unauthorized visitor had reached his office. The response came quickly. Security cameras showed the nun entering the building through the main lobby, but the footage was mysteriously corrupted at crucial moments. Guards at various checkpoints had clear memories of seeing an elderly woman, but their recollections were vague and inconsistent about how she had gained authorization to proceed. The more Alexander learned about the nun's journey through his security system, the more intrigued he became. This was not a random occurrence or a simple security failure. Someone with considerable skill and resources had either helped her infiltrate the building, or she possessed capabilities that defied conventional explanation. The mystery deepened his curiosity, even as it increased his wariness. For several long minutes, Alexander and the nun studied each other across the expanse of his office. She seemed to be evaluating him with the same intensity that he was directing toward her, as if she were confirming something she already knew or searching for signs of something she hoped to find. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions and unexpressed purposes. Alexander noticed details about the nun that suggested her background was more complex than her simple religious garb indicated. Her hands, though aged, showed signs of education and refinement. The fingers were long and elegant, with calluses that suggested years of writing rather than manual labor. Her posture was erect and confident, speaking to a lifetime of authority and responsibility rather than subservience. The nun's habit was also noteworthy. While it appeared traditional, the fabric was of exceptional quality, and the tailoring was precise. This was not the rough clothing of a poor religious order, but the carefully maintained garments of someone who valued dignity and presentation. Small details, like the perfectly arranged folds and the subtle silver crucifix at her throat, suggested resources and attention to detail that contradicted assumptions about humble religious life. Alexander found himself genuinely curious about this woman's background and motives. In his business dealings, he had encountered numerous individuals who sought his attention for various reasons: investment opportunities, charitable causes, personal favors, or attempts at extortion. But none had ever approached him in such an unusual manner, and few had managed to capture his attention so completely within moments of meeting. The nun's continued silence was both frustrating and compelling. She clearly had something important to communicate, but she seemed to be waiting for the right moment or the proper signal to begin. Alexander realized that despite being in his own office and surrounded by the trappings of his power, he was not controlling this interaction. The elderly woman had somehow seized the initiative through her mere presence and patient observation. When the nun finally spoke, her voice was soft but clear, carrying an accent that Alexander couldn't immediately place, but which suggested European origins and excellent education. Her first words were not what he expected. Instead of explaining her presence or stating her business, she offered a simple observation about his office that demonstrated remarkable insight. The nun commented on a particular painting hanging on the far wall, a lesser-known work by a Renaissance master that Alexander had acquired privately and which was not widely documented. Her observation about the painting's provenance and the circumstances of its creation revealed knowledge that only a serious art historian or collector would possess. This was not casual appreciation, but deep, scholarly understanding of artistic heritage and history. Alexander was immediately intrigued by this demonstration of expertise. The painting in question had been acquired through discreet channels from a European collector, and its history was known to only a handful of people worldwide. The nun's knowledge suggested either extensive research into his personal collection or familiarity with art circles that few people could access. Her commentary on the painting seemed to serve as a form of introduction, a way of establishing her credibility and intelligence before proceeding to more serious matters. She was demonstrating that despite her humble appearance, she possessed knowledge and connections that commanded respect. This was not a random supplicant, but someone with genuine qualifications to demand his attention. The conversation about art also served to relax the tension in the room slightly. Alexander found himself responding to her observations with his own knowledge and passion for collecting. For a few minutes, the mysterious circumstances of her arrival were set aside as they discussed artistic technique, historical context, and the challenges of authenticating works from earlier centuries. As their conversation continued, the nun began to weave in personal observations about Alexander that demonstrated intimate knowledge of his background and history. She mentioned details about his childhood that were not part of his public biography, specific schools he had attended, teachers who had influenced him, and family circumstances that he rarely discussed even with close associates. The nun spoke about Alexander's mother with particular insight, describing her character and values in ways that suggested personal acquaintance. She mentioned small details about his mother's habits and preferences that could only have come from direct observation or detailed conversations with someone who knew her well. This knowledge was both comforting and unsettling, as it suggested connections to his past that he had not anticipated. Alexander's mother had died when he was 16, a loss that had profoundly shaped his subsequent drive for success and control. The nun's gentle references to his mother's wisdom and strength touched on emotions that he had carefully buried beneath years of business achievement and personal discipline. Her ability to evoke these memories with such accuracy was both impressive and disturbing. The personal details she shared were not invasive or exploitative, but rather seemed intended to establish a foundation of trust and understanding. The nun was demonstrating that she knew him not just as a powerful businessman, but as a human being with a complex personal history. She was acknowledging his full humanity rather than simply appealing to his wealth or influence. As she spoke about his past, Alexander found himself remembering aspects of his childhood and family life that he had not thought about for years. The nun's observations were triggering a cascade of memories and emotions that he typically kept carefully controlled. Her presence was somehow creating space for reflection and introspection that his busy, achievement-focused life rarely allowed. The nun's demeanor shifted subtly as she moved from personal observations to what appeared to be the true purpose of her visit. Her voice became more serious, and her expression took on the gravity of someone preparing to share information of profound importance. She asked Alexander to sit down, suggesting that what she was about to reveal would require his full attention and might come as a significant shock. Alexander remained standing initially, his business instincts warning him to maintain his position of authority and control. However, something in the nun's expression convinced him that her request was not a manipulation, but a genuine concern for his well-being. He moved to one of the comfortable chairs near his desk, gesturing for her to take the seat across from him. The nun began by speaking about secrets that families sometimes keep, about truths that are hidden to protect children or to preserve certain illusions about the past. Her words were carefully chosen, preparing Alexander for revelations that would challenge his understanding of his own history and identity. She spoke with the compassion of someone who understood the pain that truth could sometimes bring. She mentioned that his mother had asked her many years ago to watch over Alexander from a distance and to intervene if circumstances ever required it. This admission explained how she knew so much about his personal history and family background. She had been an invisible guardian, monitoring his life and development while remaining completely hidden from his awareness. The nun's role as a secret guardian raised numerous questions about her relationship with his family and the circumstances that had led to such an arrangement. Alexander realized that his understanding of his own past was about to be fundamentally altered by whatever this woman was preparing to tell him. The foundation of his personal history, which he had considered stable and well understood, was beginning to shift beneath him. With careful deliberation, the nun began to reveal information about Alexander's parentage that contradicted everything he had believed about his origins. She explained that the man he had known as his father was not his biological parent, and that his true paternity involved circumstances that his mother had kept secret to protect both Alexander and others who could have been affected by the truth. The revelation was delivered with compassion, but without softening the impact of its implications. Alexander's biological father had been a man of considerable prominence and wealth, but also someone whose acknowledgement of paternity would have created scandal and potentially dangerous complications for everyone involved. His mother had made the difficult decision to raise Alexander as the son of her husband, protecting the secret even at considerable personal cost. Alexander's mind reeled as he processed this information. His entire sense of identity had been built on assumptions about his parentage and heritage that were apparently false. The man he had mourned as his father, whose values and example had shaped his character, was not genetically related to him. His mother, whom he had always admired for her strength and integrity, had maintained a fundamental deception throughout his childhood. The nun provided documentation that supported her claims, letters, photographs, and legal documents that had been kept in secure storage for decades. The evidence was comprehensive and convincing, leaving little room for doubt about the truth of her revelations. Alexander's mother had prepared thoroughly for the possibility that this truth might someday need to be revealed. The implications of this revelation extended beyond personal identity to practical concerns about inheritance, legal standing, and business relationships. Alexander realized that his entire empire might be built on a foundation that was legally questionable if his true parentage became public knowledge. The secret that had protected him as a child now threatened the achievements of his adult life. The moment of ultimate revelation came when the nun leaned forward and whispered a name that Alexander recognized immediately. A name that sent shockwaves through his understanding of power, wealth, and influence in the modern world. The name belonged to one of the most prominent and controversial figures in international business, a man whose empire dwarfed even Alexander's considerable holdings. This man, whose identity had been whispered, was not merely wealthy but was connected to networks of influence that spanned governments, international organizations, and global financial systems. He was known for his ruthlessness in business, his manipulation of political processes, and his ability to operate above the laws that constrained ordinary individuals. The suggestion that this man was Alexander's biological father carried implications that went far beyond family relationships. Alexander understood immediately why his mother had kept this secret. Association with his biological father would have exposed Alexander to dangers and corrupting influences that could have destroyed his character and possibly his life. His mother had sacrificed her own peace of mind to protect him from a legacy that she considered toxic and destructive. The whispered name also explained certain aspects of Alexander's life that had never made complete sense. His unusual business instincts, his ability to navigate complex financial situations, and his natural understanding of power dynamics suddenly had a potential genetic explanation. Traits he had attributed to his upbringing and education might actually be inherited characteristics from a biological father he had never known. The revelation created a crisis of identity for Alexander. Was he his mother's son, shaped by her values and the man who had raised him, or was he his biological father's heir, destined to follow in the footsteps of someone he had always considered morally reprehensible? The question challenged his fundamental understanding of nature versus nurture and the sources of human character. The nun continued her explanation by detailing the specific dangers associated with Alexander's hidden parentage. His biological father was not merely a controversial businessman, but was connected to networks involved in activities that operated at the edges of legality and morality. These networks included elements involved in international arms dealing, political manipulation, and financial schemes that had destabilized entire economies. Knowledge of Alexander's true parentage could make him a target for numerous hostile interests. Enemies of his biological father might seek to use Alexander as leverage or revenge. Criminal organizations might attempt to force him into cooperation based on family connections. Government agencies might view him as a security risk or attempt to recruit him as an intelligence asset. The nun revealed that his mother had not acted alone in protecting this secret. A network of trusted individuals, including herself, had worked for decades to monitor threats and deflect potential dangers that might arise from Alexander's hidden heritage. This network had operated invisibly, providing protection and guidance without Alexander's knowledge or consent. The protective network had been activated several times over the years when situations arose that could have exposed Alexander's true parentage. Business deals had been quietly redirected, potential partners had been warned away, and information had been suppressed to maintain the security of his false identity. Alexander realized that many aspects of his business success might have been influenced by this hidden protection. The nun explained that the network was now aging and its ability to provide protection was diminishing. Recent developments in international intelligence gathering and genetic identification technology were making it increasingly difficult to maintain the secret. The time had come to inform Alexander of the truth so he could make informed decisions about his own protection and future. Block 10. The choice presented. The nun presented Alexander with a stark choice that would determine the course of his remaining life. He could continue living under his assumed identity, but with the knowledge that his secret was becoming increasingly difficult to protect. Alternatively, he could acknowledge his true parentage and attempt to claim his place in his biological father's empire. But with all the moral compromises and physical dangers that such a choice would entail, continuing with his current identity would require enhanced security measures and possibly fundamental changes to his business operations. He would need to distance himself from certain international markets and business partners who might pose security risks. His movements would need to be more carefully monitored, and his communications would require encryption and surveillance countermeasures. The alternative path, embracing his biological heritage, would provide access to virtually unlimited resources and power. His biological father's empire could absorb Alexander's holdings and expand them exponentially. However, this path would require moral compromises that Alexander had spent his entire adult life avoiding. He would become part of a system that he had always considered corrupt and destructive. The nun made it clear that neutrality was not an option. The secret of Alexander's parentage was becoming impossible to maintain, and hostile forces were already beginning to investigate his background. He would soon be forced to choose sides in conflicts that extended far beyond business competition into areas of international politics, intelligence operations, and organized crime. The decision would affect not only Alexander, but also everyone connected to him. His employees, business partners, family members, and friends could all become targets or be forced to make their own difficult choices about association with him. The nun emphasized that this was not a decision he could make lightly or postpone indefinitely. Block 11. The time pressure. The nun revealed that Alexander's choice was not merely urgent, but was being forced by specific developments that were already in motion. Intelligence agencies from multiple countries had begun investigating connections between Alexander's business empire and his biological father's network. Within months, if not weeks, the truth about his parentage would become known to hostile interests. Recent technological advances in genetic identification had made it possible for intelligence agencies to trace family relationships through publicly available genetic databases. Several of Alexander's distant relatives had submitted genetic samples to genealogy services, creating a trail that sophisticated analysts could follow back to his biological father. The protective network had been unable to prevent this technological exposure. International law enforcement agencies were also closing in on his biological father's operations, and they were systematically investigating all known associates and potential family members. Alexander's business success and international holdings had attracted attention from investigators who were looking for hidden assets and money laundering operations. His name was already appearing on surveillance lists and intelligence reports. The nun explained that the protective network had learned of these developments through contacts within various government agencies. They had perhaps 6 weeks before Alexander's true identity would be exposed through official investigations. After that point, his current life would become impossible to maintain, and his choices would be severely limited. The urgency of the situation meant that Alexander could not take time to fully research and consider his options. He would need to make a life-altering decision based on incomplete information and under extreme time pressure. The nun emphasized that delay would only make his eventual situation more dangerous and his options more limited. Block 12. The Final Revelation. In her final revelation, the nun disclosed her own true identity and role in the protective network that had watched over Alexander throughout his life. She was not merely a religious figure who had known his mother, but was herself connected to intelligence networks that operated at the highest levels of international politics and finance. Her religious calling provided perfect cover for activities that required deep discretion and absolute trust. The nun had been involved in intelligence operations for over 40 years, using her religious status to move freely across international borders and to gain access to information and individuals that would be impossible for conventional operatives to reach. Her network included religious figures, academics, and humanitarian workers who shared information and provided protection for individuals caught in dangerous political and financial circumstances. Alexander's mother had been part of this network before his birth, working to expose and counter the harmful activities of the man who was Alexander's biological father. Her relationship with Alexander's biological father had been part of an intelligence operation that had gone wrong, resulting in her pregnancy and the need to create a completely new identity for herself and her child. The protective network had been watching over Alexander not only because of his mother's request, but also because his unique position could potentially be used to gather intelligence on his biological father's operations. They had hoped that Alexander would eventually choose to work against his biological father's network, using his potential access to help dismantle dangerous criminal and political operations. The nun revealed that the choice she was presenting to Alexander was not simply about his personal safety and future, but about his potential role in a larger struggle between forces working to preserve democratic institutions and rule of law versus those seeking to undermine them for personal gain. His decision would affect not only his own life, but the lives of countless others who could be harmed by his biological father's continued operations. Block 13. The Moment of Decision. As the nun concluded her revelations, Alexander sat in stunned silence, trying to process the magnitude of what he had learned and the implications of the choice he faced. Everything he had believed about his identity, his family, and his place in the world had been fundamentally altered in the space of a few hours. The comfortable certainties that had anchored his life were gone, replaced by complex moral and practical dilemmas that defied easy resolution. The nun waited patiently for his response, understanding that the decision she was asking him to make would reshape his entire existence. She had delivered her message with compassion, but without attempting to influence his choice. The decision had to be his alone, made with full knowledge of the consequences, but without coercion from the network that had protected him for so long. Alexander found himself thinking about his mother and the sacrifices she had made to give him a normal childhood and moral foundation. He thought about the man who had raised him as a father, whose values and example had shaped his character. He considered the employees and partners who depended on his business empire and the responsibility he felt toward them. The weight of the decision was enormous, but Alexander realized that in some ways the choice had already been made by the life his mother had chosen for him and the values she had instilled. He could not betray the moral foundation she had given him, even if acknowledging his true heritage might provide greater wealth and power. Looking directly at the nun, Alexander made his decision. He would not claim his place in his biological father's empire, but neither would he continue hiding from the truth of his parentage. He would use his resources and position to help the network dismantle the harmful operations his biological father had built, honoring his mother's memory by choosing justice over personal advantage. The nun smiled for the first time since entering his office, recognizing in his choice the moral courage that his mother had hoped to nurture. She stood to leave, but not before providing him with contact information for the network and specific instructions for the security measures he would need to implement immediately. The battle for his life and soul was just beginning, but he had chosen the right side in a conflict that would define not only his future, but the future of democratic civilization itself. Thank you for joining us for this compelling story of hidden identities, family secrets, and moral choices that define our character. The encounter between Alexander and the mysterious nun reminds us that our true inheritance is not wealth or power, but the values and principles that guide our decisions in moments of crisis. We'd love to hear from our viewers around the world. Please share in the comments which country you're watching from, and let us know what you think about the choice Alexander made. Your perspectives from different cultures and backgrounds always enrich our understanding of these universal human dilemmas.